for the curious minds, it's something called the Zeigarnik effect in psychology. When you only get a little bit of information, you want to know what the rest of it is. So
Mm.
hopefully listeners want to keep listening because they haven't heard all six. But a little bit of the Zeigarnik effect. They use it in marketing a lot. Uh, but okay, we've talked about cognitive diffusion, which is your capacity to notice your head saying a whole lot of things all the time. Even as you and I are talking, Derek, your head is saying things, my head is saying things, the listeners' heads are saying things. That's just what our brain does. It produces thoughts. So being able to step back from your thoughts, especially the ones that are pushing you around, bullying you, and heading you in directions that you don't want to go. Seeing your mind is not the authority of you. The second one that we talked about is acceptance, getting curious, opening up, and allowing. And I use those words sometimes more than acceptance when I'm working with clients or I'm coaching someone, because acceptance has this sort of quality to it that we think it means approval or liking something.
Mm.
But really, we're not talking about approving or liking of anything. We're actually talking about just allowing what is. And it's actually when we allow something that we don't like to be what is, we can actually start to take action, right? So acceptance is the second one. And then the third one is values. We've just talked about some values around parenting and how you want to be as a parent. I kind of cluing in a little bit. You want to be present and take care of these little kiddos and also be fun. I heard of you kind of, as you were describing that, you sound like a fun dad. That's something maybe you care about. And also adventurous. And then, okay, so we got three more. This is where I have to test I wrote a book on this, but I can't always remember when somebody's asking me. Okay, so now we have perspective taking, which is a fantastic skill and actually something that you should start training in your kids now. I do a lot of perspective taking training with my kids. So perspective taking is your ability to step back and see your own self story, take perspective on yourself. Perspective taking also has to do with being able to get behind the eyes of another, and it's at the cornerstone of it's really at the base of empathy and problem solving and collaborative communication, because when you can take perspective on your own story and then also get behind the eyes of another and see their perspective, all of a sudden your relationships get a lot healthier, and so does your work environment, and then so does also your relationship with your, being a parent. Now, kids can't do a whole lot of perspective taking until they have theory of mind, which is a little bit later. So you don't have to quiz them on this yet. But in our family, I incorporate a lot of these skills into my parenting and into like our dinner table conversations. And I will say things like, if you were me, what would you be, what do you think I'd be
Mm.
feeling right now? Or when somebody's talking about a conflict that happened at school, if you were him and those are the circumstances that you were experiencing, what would you feel? What do you think you'd be thinking? What would be your experience? So practicing perspective taking is incredibly helpful. Okay, so then we have the fifth one, which is being present.
Mm.
Okay, we all know that's important. It's important to be present, but also to be present in the places that matter most to us. So a lot of times we expect ourselves to be present all the time. I can get really successful at that when I'm on a retreat or I'm in a
Mm.
quiet space.
Sure.
Hard to do that in our daily lives. What we can do is get present where it matters, and we can get out of our heads and into our body and into the moment and notice the sensations, some interoceptive awareness of what's happening in our bodies, awareness of what's around us, right? And then just even aware of other humans, right? So when we're more present, we're better able to break up patterns and be more effective. And then the last one we kind of alluded to, which is committed action. And committed action is about getting clear on what's important to you and then taking action, not just thinking about it, but doing it. And committed action has a lot of behavioral principles behind it. So it's usually small little steps that you use behavioral reinforcement with. And the type of committed action that we do in ACT is committed action that's reinforced because you're doing something that's values aligned, and values are intrinsically rewarding. Just by the nature of acting on your values and savoring that feeling of I'm being how I want to be in the world, as one of my co-hosts Jill Stoddard would say, the me that I want to be, that reinforces the behavior that we want to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the six processes, and together they build what's called psychological flexibility.
Fantastic. I want to ask you, in particular, you were talking about the presence and the getting in, feeling your body. And I realize as a trained yoga practitioner that that might be one that you're sort of innately even sort of more dialed in to, the awareness of the sort of presence through physicality.
Hmm. Yeah, it came from yoga and also came from recovering from an eating disorder because the route to recovery for me was interoceptive awareness and appetite awareness and hunger and fullness awareness and getting out of rules and shoulds and getting into what my body, like listening to my body. Am I hungry? Am I full? Right. And that's actually what my early research was on at the University of Colorado. I was studying interoceptive awareness, hunger and fullness, appetite awareness, and treating bulimia in particular. So we in the West are we're pretty disembodied. And our culture reinforces disembodiment, right? It reinforces us, spending a lot of time in our head and problem solving. And almost like a lot of times when I work with people, they feel like they're just completely cut off from their natural intelligence, which is their body. Our bodies tell us really important stuff all the time. So tuning in for me was, yes, both like spiritual, but also just really being able to heal some behaviors that were really unhealthy
Mm.
for me. Yeah.
I was walking barefoot yesterday out in my backyard, and I've been wearing shoes all winter. And I had this experience of my feet didn't seem as sensitive as they should be. I was like, why am I not getting the sort of like ground feedback feeling? And that disembodiedness, sort of, I felt like, wow, like, and it's the same with like how to tell exactly how full you are, or whether you're actually thirsty or full, these subtle little things.
I love that because what you're also alluding to there is that a lot of the way that our world is set up disconnects us from nature. And so when we're disconnected from nature, we also forget that we are nature, that
Mm.
nature is not something separate from us, as well as like things like going barefoot to allow your foot to do what it fully does. Going back to Katie Bowman, this isn't a Katie Bowman plug podcast, but she's taught me a lot. Uh, there's sort of three human needs. Like humans need to hang, we need to squat, and we need to walk, right? And how much of us do any of three of those, right? But the reason why is because evolutionarily, that's what we would do. We're not that far off. If you look at like a phylogenetic tree of I'm teaching this in my homeschool right now, so I'm kind of into science and evolution. If you look at phylogenetic tree, humans left um, monkeys like really, really recently, right? We have a long history of hanging, squatting, and walking. So that's where I think that part of getting embodied is also remembering who we are, and there's ways in which we can remember who we are. We can do that by slowing down. We can do that by being in nature. We can do that by uh, listening in a little bit more and tuning in more to our body's natural wisdom.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. That our if we're sitting in our office and surrounded by walls, we're in a box. We're thinking inside of a box, and if, what you see around you, what you're paying attention to. If you're not paying attention to nature, then all the sort of pile of plastic in the ocean and all these things, like, they're not really in your awareness, and so it's easy to have systems and corporations set up that just have these unintended consequences. So yeah, I love that if we remember that we're nature, large mammals, uh, then the outcomes of all our systems end up being more aligned, I think.
We can learn a lot from nature and ecosystems and seeing ourselves as part of ecosystems. I'm actually a bee guardian. So I
Hmm.
have a little homestead here in Santa Barbara and we have chickens and bees and a, an orchard and gardens and stuff. But what's cool about bees is that each of the little bees has their own job. So there's like the bees that go out and get pollen. There's the guardian bees that protect the door from yellow jackets.
Hmm.
And then there's the nursery bees, and all their job is just to like take care of all the babies, even though they're not their babies, they're the queen's babies, right? So they all have their jobs. But what's interesting is when you become a bee guardian, you learn that you're supposed to give your hive a name. And even though there's 50,000 little species inside of this hive, you give it a singular name. So we have like Norman the hive, because they work synergistically. They work as a whole. And they need to work together. They're completely interdependent upon one another. So we can look at that metaphor in terms of us as humans, like actually, literally, we are completely interdependent upon each other. And this past year has taught us a lot about that, just our food
Mm.
system and, you know, how interdependent we really are. But we can also look at that within our own mini ecosystem of ourselves, right? So our mental health is interdependent with our physical health. Our microbiome is interdependent, you know, with our immune system, like all these ways in which we're interdependent. And with psychological flexibility and ACT, I would say even these six core processes are interdependent with each other. That in order to uh, be present, all of a sudden our values are going to start to show up. And when our values start to show up, there's going to be pain that starts to show up. And when pain starts to show up, all of a sudden we need acceptance and willingness to experience pain. So these six core processes also work together like a hive, and they're interdependent. Our psychology is interdependent on these sort of six processes that work together.
Hmm. That's a fantastic analogy. Thank you for sharing.